Ever found yourself rambling on and on about a topic you're passionate about and thought, I could make a podcast about this, but were unsure of where to start? Well, I'm here to tell you from experience that it's pretty simple when you use Anchor. First of all, it's completely free, so you don't have to spend a dime on distributing your podcast. They also bring sponsors to you, and you can choose which ones you'd like to work with, so you don't have to worry about finding people to pay you to do what you love. Second, it comes in app form, so you can record while traveling, save interviews right onto the app, and easily edit and add free music into your episodes. Anchor distributes everywhere podcasts are published, so even if you have a wide range of people interested in what you have to say, they'll all be able to tune in. Also, Anchor doesn't require minimum listenership in order to earn money for your hard work, so even if you're growing like I am, you can still make a little side cash. So if you have an idea and a phone to record your voice, download the free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started. Hello everyone. If you're a first-time listener, welcome to Strange Origins. If you've been with me before, then welcome back. I want to thank my sister Megan for this week's suggestion. While I had thought of doing an episode on the Loch Ness Monster, it somehow didn't occur to me to do an episode on the most iconic sea creature of all time, the mermaid. As a side note before I begin, I would like to explain that there are quite a few different types of sea creatures, or maidens listed here as early versions of mermaids in this episode. That's simply because the modern idea of a mermaid wasn't born out of nowhere. It evolved from older, more complicated versions of the creature. But that's not to say that I won't be doing episodes on creatures like merrows, sirens, sea nymphs, and other such folklore. There are more stories on the histories of underwater men and women than one could possibly imagine, and I will do my best to differentiate them and to shine a light on as much as possible within each category of strange origins. Now, if you've ever seen Disney's The Little Mermaid, you know that the basic mermaid is half human, half fish. Usually the upper half, from the hips up, is the form of a beautiful human woman with long hair, and if she's fashionable, then a seashell bra. Her bottom half is a long, sparkly tail with scales. They are known throughout history for their singing voice, which in darker versions of the story tempt sailors to follow them to the bottom of the ocean. They can sometimes be found on rocks enjoying the sunlight and combing their hair or playing with shiny trinkets. The name mermaid comes from an amalgamation of the word mare, meaning sea in Old English, and maid, meaning young woman. These creatures appear in folklore across pretty much all cultures, with different names and shapes in which they appear, ranging from beautiful and demure to frightening and vengeful. While Ariel was your typical Disney princess, all good and forever virtuous, albeit a little naive, mermaids throughout history have been, surprisingly, pretty tempestuous. They weren't afraid to exact a little revenge, or just kill with no remorse. With a majority of planet Earth being covered by water, most of which has never even been explored, it's not surprising that the lore of mermaids has traveled across the globe. So get cozy, grab yourself a drink, and let's dive right on in. While I usually can dig up around 1 or 2 origin stories for the creation of a myth, mermaids are a bit different. Their form has been slowly morphing for thousands of years. It seems like every culture has some form of a water-based deity that they worshipped at some point in time. So I'll do my best to give you a general timeline of creatures that helped to create what is today the modern mermaid. Around 1200 BC in Mesopotamian mythology, there was a god referred to as Owens. He was reported to be an amphibious man who hid under the head and tail of a fish. During the daytime, according to the records of a Babylonian priest, he would come out during the daylight on the Persian Gulf and teach people about the arts of writing and science. He is supposedly one of 7 men who are either demigods or humans that were sent by Assyrian gods to impart wisdom to the people who lived during that time. The first known story of a female mermaid showed up in Assyria about 300 years later, around 1000 BC, and it featured the goddess Atargatis. She was a Syrian goddess of femininity, the moon, and water, kind of akin to the Greek goddess of love, Aphrodite, who was also born of water. Legend states that Atargatis loved a mortal man, a shepherd, who she unintentionally killed. Not wanting to face what she had done, she jumped into a lake and took on the form of a fish. It's said, though, that the waters would not conceal her divine beauty, so she was destined to be half woman, half fish. In Cambodia, there was a fish-like creature who came from Hindu mythology, though I can't seem to find a timeline related to him. Matsya was the avatar of the Hindu god Vishnu, while he was in the form of either a full fish or a half fish. He was reported to have saved the first human from the Great Deluge, or in other words, the Great Flood that occurred sometime in history that is mentioned in a lot of historical or religious texts. Around 750 BC, sirens made their first big appearance in the classic tale The Odyssey by Homer, which I'm sure we have all studied at some point in high school or college English classes. The story recounts the 10-year journey home of a man who was sent off to fight in the Trojan War. He goes through quite a few adventures, defeating enemies and facing the ill will of the Greek gods, but one short story tells of his experience with sirens. While on a ship sailing home, he passes an island that he was previously warned about. The sirens, which in Greek mythology were not half fish, half woman, but instead half bird, half woman, flew to the ship and began trying to tempt the men to land on the island with their beautiful songs. Odysseus, though, ever prepared, had already ordered his men to stuff their ears with wax and to tie him up to the mast so that he couldn't escape, seeing as he was curious and wanted to hear the sirens call. While Homer never really described these creatures in full detail in the Odyssey, art from the time represents them as half-bird. Mythology states that these siren women were either born as a way for the goddess Demeter to retrieve her daughter Persephone, who was kidnapped by the god of the underworld Hades. In other stories, they were punished for allowing her to be kidnapped and made to be ugly half-bird creatures. Later on, more beautiful versions of mermaids began popping up in Greek mythology. Nereids, or sea nymphs, or minor goddesses, which I will be sure to do another episode on describing in full detail. They usually were depicted as having legs, but oftentimes were known to shapeshift to have mermaid tails. While tempestuous, they would often help out sailors in need. Around the 2nd century AD during the medieval age, a book called The Physiologist was created. It was sort of an encyclopedia of plants and animals known at the time. It's a predecessor to bestiaries, which were, quote, Book of the Beasts, which featured similar illustrations and descriptions of animals. It's thought now that a few of the stories of animals were written as parables about Christ, seeing as it was written as a Christian manuscript. An example of this includes the phoenix, who burns itself to death only to rise after the 3rd day, which is symbolic of Christ's resurrection in the New Testament. What I couldn't find, though, was a reason for mermaids to exist in that book. In a 1905 translation of the book, the passage on mermaids reads as follows. It is a beast of the sea, wonderly shapen as a maid from the navel upward and a fish from the navel downward. And this wonderful beast is glad and merry in tempest, and sad and heavy in fair weather. With sweetness of song this beast maketh shipmen to sleep, and when she seeth that they are asleep, she goeth into the ship, and ravisheth which she may take with her, and bringeth him into a dry place, and maketh him first lie by her. And if he will not or may not, then she slayeth him and eateth his flesh. While it's possible that this story could have been written as a way of warning against the dangers of sexual temptation, mermaids seem to be a pretty strange way of telling that type of story. In a similarly dark version of the creature, Slavic nations were famous for their version of a mermaid, referred to as rusalkis. While it's said that the pre-pagan Slavic people did not consider these women evil, the story morphed in the 1800s. While previously considered simple water nymphs who took care of farmland by giving it plenty of water, the story has turned a bit dark. Rusalkis now are considered dangerous women who died by drowning, either through murder or suicide, due to the fact that they were pregnant out of wedlock. Sometimes these women rose up out of the water to avenge their death and the death of their unborn child. They are said to have long hair, pale skin, and eyes that don't have pupils. They are especially known for stalking groups of men and dragging them back to the water to murder them. They can do this because, unlike mermaids, they have legs. During the first week of summer in certain Slavic communities, at least before the 1930s, they celebrated what is called Rusalki Week. Swimming in any natural body of water was forbidden, and it was thought that Rusalkis came ashore and danced under trees. It's even said that the grass under which the Rusalkis would dance during that week would come up thicker and greener than before. If anyone witnessed these gatherings, they would instantly die. This was especially true for men who were passerbys, as they were said to be deeply hated by the Rusalki women for impregnating and abandoning them. A much warmer story is that of the African Mami Wata. She's often described as a woman's upper body, which is often nude, with the hindquarters of a fish or serpent, though occasionally she appears as fully human, holding a snake around herself. Her spiritual importance is rooted in the traditions of the coastal southeastern Nigerians, such as the Efik, Ibibio, and Anang people. She's often seen carrying expensive baubles like combs, mirrors, and watches, which reminds me a lot of that scene in The Little Mermaid where she's showing off her collection of shiny objects. Sometimes she attempts to pass as human walking through busy markets or bars. In the Democratic Republic of the Congo, she is referred to as Madame Poisson, meaning Mistress Fish. In Jamaica, she's called River Mama, and in Colombia, she's referred to as Madre de Agua, or Mother of Water. Sometimes she's known to abduct people out on the water, where they are transported to a magical realm. If she allows them to go back to their lives, she will put them back on dry land with dry clothes. These people will report having new insights into their lives and become wealthier and more confident and attractive. She was also known for having presented herself to African slaves taken to South America in the 1740s. The abused slaves were known to worship her through dance. A governor at the time, who ended up banning these rituals, noted that, quote, "The Papa, Nago, Arada, and other slaves have introduced certain devilish practices into their dancing, which they have transposed to all other slaves. When a certain rhythm is played, they are possessed by their god, which is generally called Watramama." End quote. Overall, she is a good spirit, wishing only well for her people and especially those who worship her to this day. Her followers today are known for giving her trinkets, something we know she loves, and other items such as alcohol, jewelry, or even cans of Coca-Cola. In France, the Mary Morgan are another set of mermaid-like creatures who were supposedly half siren, making them much more tempestuous than Mami Wata. They were known for taking husbands who could live underwater with them, but if they decided to go back to dry land, they would end up dying. Around 1300 AD, the freshwater spirit called Melusine showed up in stories. She was noted for having the bottom half of a serpent rather than a fish. The mythology states that her mother Procene was also a serpent-like creature. When the King of Albany, a country that is currently known as Scotland, was out hunting in his forests, he came across Priscine, who was reported to be very beautiful in her human form. They decided to get married, but under the condition that her husband was never to look in on her or their triplet daughters while they were bathing. He must not have been very good at following orders, because he did it anyways. While I'm not sure if he was scared or angry about the fact that he had married a half-snake woman, it was actually Priscine who decided to leave due to the fact that he had broken his promise. Years later, around the time her daughters were around 15, they decided to get revenge on their father for breaking his promise. After their mother found out, Messalene was cursed to always turn into a half-serpent on Saturdays. Years later, Messalene fell in love with a human. They decided to get married with the one condition that he could never look in on her on Saturdays. Of course, he broke his promise and saw that she was half-snake. After she forgave him, he made the mistake of calling her a serpent during an argument in front of a group of people. Infuriated, she retaliated by turning into a dragon and flying off, never to return. Not all stories of mermaids are of women, though. A famous Scottish folklore states that the blue men of the Minch will drag down anyone sailing from the Outer Hebrides to the mainland of Scotland. While they look like men, these creatures are strangely blue. They also have the power to conjure up storms when they feel like it. To entertain themselves, they will stop boats passing by and challenge the captain by giving him 2 lines of poetry and having them finish the verse. If the captain failed to finish the verse of poetry, the blue men would sink their boat, killing all the men aboard. That's not the only myth passed down through from the Scots concerning mermaids, though. It's said that a group of mermaids referred to as mermaids were required to wear caps on their heads that allowed them to swim through rough weather. Often men would steal these caps in order to make the women their wives, forcing them to live on land. But years later, if the cap was found, they would often desert their family to go back to the sea. These women are known for their green hair and for having partially webbed hands, which is a trait that's said to be passed down to generations of their offspring. Also in Scotland, there is the story of the Seask. While they have the standard upper body of a woman, their bottom halves are that of salmon, due to the fact that they live in rivers and streams instead of oceans. If you catch her, you are often granted 3 wishes, much like a genie. A few of the more successful fishermen of Scotland were thought to be offspring of these women, as it was thought that they helped out their offspring during storms or in guiding them to areas where fish were plenty. In Cornish mythology, there is a happier part of the mermaid folklore. The story tells of the Mermaid of Zinnor. First recorded by William Bottrell in 1873, the story tells of a woman who, dressed in all of her finery, attended a service at St. Sinar's Church in Zenner. The people who attended church with her were enchanted by her beauty and her singing voice, which people noted as being sweeter than anything they'd ever heard before. She would attend services on and off for years, and as the parishioners began to age, they noticed that she did not, remaining what seemed like the same age for years. After a while of this, the woman became interested in one of the men who attended church, Matthew Truella, and after church one day he followed her home to see where she had come from, seeing as none of the other parishioners knew where she lived. He was never seen again, and it's thought to this day that she took him back to the sea to live with her. This was substantiated then by reports that at a nearby cove, a mermaid showed herself to a ship, asking it to raise its anchor, which had just been lowered onto the door of her home, stating that she couldn't get to her children inside. To this day, there is a famous mermaid bench that sits inside of the St. Sinar's Church that has mermaids carved into the sides, though it's thought that the chair predates the story, as some believe it to be 600 years old. Today we can see mermaids in films like Splash, Aquaman, H2O, any of the Peter Pan iterations, Disney's The 13th Year, and my personal favorite, Aquamarine. The truest to form versions, though, are the ones featured in the Harry Potter and the Pirates of the Caribbean franchises. They are enchanting and deadly. They lure sailors and swimmers to their death, and they have secrets beyond your wildest imagination. This fascination with temptresses of the sea most likely arose from the fact that women weren't allowed on ships when a lot of men made their money sailing. Large crews of men would often find themselves lonely, daydreaming of their girlfriends or wives who weren't allowed to work with them or were raising families back on land. They would spend months, if not years, working on boats, working as transporters or as fishermen, only able to go home once in a blue moon. So while time seemed to be drawn out endlessly, it wouldn't be surprising if stories of dangerous or beautiful mermaids were told to keep morale high and sailors entertained. It's pretty much the consensus these days that, historically speaking, sightings of mermaids were just mistaken sightings of sea cows, manatees, or dugongs, which is pretty ironic seeing as scientifically these creatures are grouped together in a family referred to as sirenians. Sirenians are, quote, large aquatic plant-eating mammals, and the name comes from the ancient Greek sirens, which, as we know now, are a precursor to the idea of a mermaid. On January 4th, 1493, Christopher Columbus even reported sightings of mermaids off of the coast of the Dominican Republic. He stated that they were, quote, not half as beautiful as they are painted. In all reality, they were most likely manatees, which makes sense seeing as they were creatures that Columbus would not have seen anywhere near his homeland of Italy, and therefore would easily mistake for something he had previously heard stories of, mermaids. In 1608, reports from Henry Hudson, one of the first Europeans to explore America, stated that his crew members and himself witnessed a mermaid look up at them from the side of their ship. They noted in a logbook that, quote, her back and breasts looked like that of a human woman, but that she possessed the tail of a porpoise, end quote. Around the same time, Captain John Smith, that handsome blonde from Disney's Pocahontas, said that he witnessed a woman with long green hair who was, quote, swimming with all possible grace and who also was by no means unattractive. There are reports, though, that this incident was fabricated, as a way to make a newspaper article written by Alexander Dumas a bit more interesting. A lot of what was thought to be proof of the existence of mermaids has been cleared up as of the last few centuries. Debunking the myth even more, in Antwerp in the mid-1600s, sailors began to sell what many thought were the dried-up corpses of mermaids, or what were thought to be relations to mermaids. For quite a long time, people pointed to these small creatures as proof of the existence of mermaids. It was discovered later on that they were simply just a skate or a ray, which was manipulated and dried stiff to look like a strange dragon-like creature. This type of scheme was reborn in the 1840s when P.T. Barnum showcased what he called his Fiji mermaids. Exhibited in notable cities such as New York, London, and Boston, these creatures were most likely created by the combination of a salmon and a juvenile monkey. Some state that it was created as a joke, while others think that such things were used in religious practices in East Indian or Japanese cultures in the 19th century. It wasn't seen as the hoax it was at the time due to the fact that Barnum had also included other animals in his exhibit that were in fact real, just fairly unknown at the time, such as the platypus, which had just barely been discovered. Be sure to check out pictures of these creatures on the Strange Origins podcast Instagram page, if you're interested. But I'm gonna warn you, they're pretty weird. In my opinion, I think that it's pretty unlikely that mermaids truly existed in the form that is so beloved by so many in this day and age. While I love the idea and I constantly joke about wanting to become a mermaid, there's just not enough evidence or reason for them to exist for me to believe in it. I do think that a lot of creatures that look like mermaids have and do exist in the ocean. It would be pretty silly not to believe in the possibility of mermaid-like creatures existing, seeing as an estimated 95% of the ocean is currently unexplored. The only thing I do know for sure is that you better keep your camera close to you when you're near the ocean. You never know what you could see. But really, mermaids aren't that hard to find. Just look at the logo on your coffee cup the next time you go to Starbucks. As this episode comes to a close, I would like to thank my listeners for supporting my dream job. Without you, I would just be someone talking into a microphone at 2 a.m. in my parents' basement, like a crazy person. But still, I would love to have more to talk about. Please email me at strangeoriginspodcast@gmail.com and tell me what it is about this week's topic that interested you, your suggestions for future episodes, or even stories of your own experiences with the strange and unexplained. If you would like to help this podcast grow, allowing me to make bigger, better episodes, be sure to click the follow button or even give it a 5-star rating if you're listening on Apple Podcasts. If you're feeling bougie, you can also donate to my Patreon page, which is linked in the description. You can donate any amount, and each tier of donation receives great gifts like shoutouts, stickers, and even exclusive episodes. Or, if you're poor like me and would just like to enjoy more spooky stuff, be sure to follow my Instagram page at Strange Origins Podcast. And if you know of a friend, a sibling, a coworker, or a pet dog who would love to listen to my podcast, send them a link. It would be greatly appreciated. Be safe out there, but more importantly, guys, remember to keep it strange.